Jane looked at Mitch as she replaced the receiver. She almost looked as if she was about to faint. Mitch figured it couldn't have been good news as he hurried forward and caught her. "What happened? Are you all right?" Jane blinked a few times, trying to get her bearings back and get her voice. There's been..." She stammered out, hardly able to say the rest. "There's been an accident. Leanne, she was critically injured. Charlie..." Going into automatic pilot, Mitch took control of the situation. "Let's get to the hospital," said Mitch, running for the door and grabbing his coat on the way. Jane followed and they sped in silence towards the hospital. On arrival, they realised two things about hospitals. One, doctors aren't very quick to volunteer information, and two, time drags its lowly feet in hospital waiting rooms. What they had been told was that Leanne had impacted with the steering wheel. She had several broken ribs, internal injuries and bleeding, and was in surgery. Most worrying was that she had a torn spleen which needed immediate suturing. Charlie had a head injury and was unconscious. It was another 3 hours before anyone told them anything. A picture was beginning to emerge of exactly what happened. Leanne had taken a sharp corner coming into Speke and towards the airport. Another car taking the corner coming from the other direction had been going way too fast, and the two vehicles had impacted. Leanne's car was a mangled wreck, but that was nothing compared to the other car, the driver of which was DOA on arrival at the hospital. Finally, a doctor appeared. After introducing himself as Dr. Everhart, he explained a bit more about Leanne's condition. The surgery had been a success, but Leanne had slipped into a coma. Charlie was showing signs of waking up soon, so Jane and Mitch headed to see Charlie first. "The hearing will have to be postponed," said Jane gently, bending to rub a thumb over Charlie's little hand. The child looked so helpless that tears rolled down her cheeks. Mitch put a comforting arm around her and bent to press a gentle kiss to his nephew's forehead. "It'll give me time to give our Frank a piece of my mind. There's no doubt about it. If it wasn't for him, the two of them would be safe and sound." "There's no point apportioning blame. These things happen," was Jane's tired reply. "I'll do for him the next time I see him," muttered Mitch under his breath. Another few agonisingly slow hours went by before the doctor came out again to give them an update. "We've got Leanne stabilised and settled in the intensive care unit. If you want to have a few minutes with her, then I'll have the nurse take you through." Jane and Mitch both nodded and got to their feet, reluctantly leaving Charlie to go and see his gravely ill mother. The nurse appeared and accompanied them to intensive care. However, nothing can prepare one for the shock of the sight of someone in a high-dependency unit. Jane fought the urge to be sick as she entered the room. The girl lying in the bed was nothing like her sparkling, full-of-life, vivacious best friend. Leanne looked as white as the sheets on the bed, her pale face and massive bruises. The hum of the machines filled the room, most of which Jane could not have identified in a month of Sundays, except, of course, for the heart monitor, which, with its steady beat, was easily identifiable. Taking a seat by the bed, with Mitch stood to the side of the bed, Jane took hold of one of the lint pans carefully. Jane still hated hospitals. They smelt funny. Nobody would give you the right information, and there was a heavy scent of sickness and death permeating everywhere through every single fibre. 10 minutes later, when the nurse came in to tell them they had to leave, they reluctantly complied. After getting a coffee from the cafeteria, they sat down in silence to drink. "Do you want me to stay with you tonight?" It was Mitch who broke the silence. Jane nodded silently. By now, there were very few cars left in the car park. Mitch helped his fiancée into the car and quickly started for home. After putting the key in the door and letting them both in, Jane, exhausted, finally sank to the ground. Mitch picked her up and carried her to the bedroom. Putting her down in the bed and pulling the covers over her, he sat on the bed, stroking her hair and talking soothingly. "Leanne is as strong as an ox, with stubbornness to match. She'll pull through. You'll see. Her and Charlie both." Jane nodded. Struggling to sit up, she leaned over and kissed him. Getting into the bed beside her, she leaned her head against his chest. closing her eyes as she was comforted by the sound of his heartbeat and the steady rhythm of his breathing. With his arms around her, she was soon fast asleep in his arms. Laying her down in the bed and pulling the covers over her properly, he kissed the top of her head. "Good night, sweetheart," he whispered, before curling up and falling into an exhausted sleep himself. The next morning, as the first rays of the sun filtered through the curtain, Jane began to stir from a deep and dreamless sleep. Suddenly aware of the warmth of a body next to hers, she smiled. Shaking his shoulder gently to wake him up, she softly called to him, "Come on, sleepyhead, it's time to get up." Mitch jerked awake and sat up. Mitch wondered where he was for a moment and why he had fallen asleep fully clothed when it all came back to him. "I'll go and have a shower, else I'll stink the hospital out. Then I'll make a nice breakfast. How does that sound?" asked Mitch, leaning over for a good morning kiss. "Sounds heavenly," agreed Jane. A little while later, with them both showered and changed, Mitch had made breakfast. Neither of them really felt like eating, but he was concerned nonetheless when, rather than eat the bacon and eggs he had made, she just pushed it round the plate and played with it. "Come on," he said softly. "Won't do you no good if you're sick with malnutrition right in the bed next to Leanne. My cooking that bad, huh?" "No," stated Jane flatly. "It's just that, every time I think I've got my life on track, something or other goes wrong." She lowered her head, putting the knife and fork down on the plate. "I sometimes even wonder if you're here to stay, or if you're just a pretty dream that will be gone tomorrow." Mitch put his fork down, jumped up and put his arms around Jane. "I'll never hurt you, and that's a promise." Jane put another forkful of egg in her mouth and grinned. "That's a promise you'd better keep to, bucko, or else."